Hello, I'm Julian Goodacre and welcome to my workshop. I've been making bagpipes for well over half my life now, and I don't have an apprentice, so I wanted to hand down to posterity some of the techniques that I use to show people. Every year I'll probably make a video to show people how I make them. Every pipe maker's developed their own techniques. There's no right and wrong. Well, the one thing that is right is something works well. Now, last year I made a video about seasoning bags. This year I'm going to make one about making bagpipe bags. And if you've made them before, you may get a few tips and wheezes from this. I may get a few tips and wheezes from the way you do it. It works. Some other pipe makers use machine sewn or riveted, different systems. This is a system that works. I'm proud of the bags that I make. Now, during the video I'll be using mentioning various supplies, and I won't be mentioning measurements or addresses or anything. That will be on a fact sheet, and at the bottom of this YouTube video you can see the link to my website where there will be a fact sheet with suppliers, dimensions and anything else you may need to know. And if you want to know anything more, I could add it to the fact sheet later. Right, let's get started. Let's talk about leather to start with. I buy my leather from Yarwoods of Leeds. There must be lots of other suppliers, but I've always found them very helpful, and they have lots of bargain bins, which is great, and a whole range of colours. They supply leather for the furniture trade, so they're only interested in this outside. They're not interested in the inside at all. The suede side, I'll call it the shiny side and the suede side. With my pipes, on mouth-blown pipes, I always have the suede on the outside and the shiny side on the inside. Bellows-blown pipes, it's the other way round. I explain about this on my seasoning thing, as there again other makers do other things and it works for them. That's fine. Now, Yarwoods is only interested, well, furniture makers are only interested in the outside. They're not interested in the inside at all, and quite often there will be what's known as a skive mark or a vein mark or something on the inside, or some bits get a bit scraggly, so you really have to, yeah, that's a scraggly bit there, you really have to go there and check out. You can't ask them to put stuff in the post, but they're very, very helpful, and they have bargain bins. So that's what I use. That's predominantly, well, that's exactly where I get my leather from. Now, bag shapes come in all different sizes, and I've developed these different ones. I've got more and more patterns for different ones. There's a border one. That's my English great pipe one, which I've actually opened up so that you don't have to double it up. That's my Cornish. My Leicestershire is the only one that has a welt join all the way around the outside, so it's much most efficient from the use of leather, but you have twice as much sewing to do, and sewing is so it's swings and roundabouts which type you use. You have to develop a shape yourself, and handy tip is with a plastic polythene rubbish bag or any piece of plastic, you can cut one out in plastic, and with masking tape or duct tape you can sort of make up the seam so it's more or less airtight, and then you can inflate it and try it under your arm and see whether the stocks might go. So rather than wasting leather and a lot of time sewing, you can do a mock-up. So that's bag shapes for you. Right, cutting out your bag. I used to use a sheet of hardboard to cut onto, and that blunted the knife quite quickly, so I got this thick sheet of plastic, which is great. You can smooth it off again with a plane if it gets too scored. And the knife I use, which is probably not the best knife, is Scalpel 10A Swan Morton. I've been using them for years, and that's what works for me. You get your leather, and a full cowhide, this isn't anything like a full cowhide, is a big sheet of leather. You probably, if you're only making one or two, you can get much smaller bit. This is a half size, I think. You then look as closely as possible, hold it up to the light to make sure there aren't any holes in it. There aren't usually holes, but to find the best bit for you, fold it over, and if you're making a bag like this, you double it over and then you're going to cut right round it, fairly straightforward. I've got holes here that I can mark the drone positions as well, which kind of helps. So then you end up with, there's a bag that's been cut out with the holes in position. Right, at this stage you're wanting to glue before putting the welt on. I would like to say a little bit about gluing. I use Goodacre, and it's a kind of latex, and I use very little because this glue is not, it's just for securing the leather during the sewing process so that things don't move off. Now, Goodacre comes in this big bottle and I find it a bit cumbersome to use, so I've converted a Body Shop squeezy, I mean any kind of squeezy thing with little nozzle, so I can put just a very small trace of glue. You really don't want to wallop it on, that's almost too much, especially the suede side sticks really well together. And then after that it's a clothes peg job. You just peg it, keep on going around. There are probably better clips than this, but I've always used clothes peg, I quite like them for doing that. Bulldog clips or something would probably work better. And you go around and you work round till you've got the entire side glued together. You're going to need a welt for going around the side of the bag, and you may be lucky if you've got a big enough sheet of leather to get a straight side to cut it on, but if you don't, you can use up smaller sections by skiving. You need a skiving knife, really sharp knife, and you're cutting it at an angle. It's good also, you can use sort of scraggly bits. That's not a very nice looking piece of leather, that, so you can use scraggly bits for this as well. And then you put the chamfer on the inside of this one, then a little bit of Goodacre. If you get too much on, you can wipe it off. It doesn't stick to your fingers that much, and it's strong right from the start on the suede side. It's really strong. So then you put that together, push it there, and right from the start, before it's dried, it's got certain amount of strength. So you're not going to notice that on a bag, and it's a very efficient way of using leather. Right, gluing the welt on. Goodacre works really well on the suede side. It just almost instantly glues, and even if you've got the shiny side on the outside, there's still enough suede there to take really good adhesion. So you make a little bead along there, but you don't want to wallop it on, just enough to fit there, and a little, once you put it, a little bit squidges just to the side, but not too much. You don't want it to squelch right to the edge of the welt. And then after that it's a question of pulling the welt so you're really sure that the suede on the outside, this surface, is touching the inside of the welt. And you just work on round to the far end. Well, this is obviously exaggerated, but if you put a hole in there through to there, you've got between the thread and the outside, you've got all that space. However, if you haven't glued the welt so it's absolutely touching the suede side, you can put the hole in exactly the same place, but you've only got that much or worse. And when you're making a bag, you've got to remember that every stitch has to work, and I'd be worried if there was only that amount of leather between that and that. So bear in mind that when you're gluing the welt on. The thread I use for sewing is made in Germany. It's polyester. It comes in 1/3 of a mile long spools. Whether you can get a shorter one, I don't know. And it's multi-strand. It's very, very strong stuff. I don't think I've ever managed to break it, but it's got a slight give in it, a slight springiness. So I've created this device along here. So I tie it up to the far end on a bollard there, and then come back to this windy device, and it's quite fun. It's amazing how much stretch there is, because obviously I don't want it to stretch once I've sewn the bag. The bag has to be airtight. So once I've tightened it that much, I then put it on this. It would have helped if I'd had a longer screw thread, and that stretches it even more. Now normally I leave it for a few hours just to relax into that, but once I wind it down again, you'll see how much it is stretched, which is quite a lot actually. So I think it's worthwhile doing this. The tools you need for hand sewing are fairly basic. Nice set of parallel pliers I found really helpful, and that has a groove down the middle to hold the needle, and I've got a spring set here which is really lovely, and I've limited the movement with a piece of string there, so that fits nicely in the hand. In fact, I could quite do with a smaller one than that. Then the leather awl, which is diamond in section and quite short, and has to be pretty sharp there, so it actually cuts through, pierces and cuts through, and that's sharp at the end. And also another one for getting yourself out of various scrapes, a fairly blind one there is very handy, and just make small handles so they fit really nicely in your hand. When you're sewing, you want something to hold the leather really tight in place, and I use this, it's a vise basically, a wooden vise. It's called, I think saddle makers call it a clam. You have jaws there which shut up. Originally when I made this I used this wing bolt, but it gets a bit tedious when you're having to open and shut it just with a wing bolt, so I made an over centre catch which speeds things up quite a bit. There's space in the middle for the leather to rest. This is quite thin because this has got some springiness in it as well, which kind of helps. I've gone out of my way to make sure this I put my needles in if I ever need to store them anywhere, and I shape that at an angle so that the thread doesn't catch there, and that flops down just so that the thread doesn't so often catch under there. So that's a clam, and you use it between your knees, and I've made a foot stand for it so it can rest on the floor without me having to hold it on my knees. So that's the clam. Right, you're trying to get a large thread through a pretty small needle's, so it's getting a camel through a needle's eye, and the way you do it is you flatten off the thread as much as possible, then hold the scalpel at a very low angle, and then pull the thread away from it, and hopefully it leaves you with a nice little taper, and hopefully that little wedgy taper will go through like that, and you pull it through. I made it look quite easy there, and it isn't always easy. I sometimes have problems doing it, but pull that through. The stitch that we use for sewing this up I think is called the saddle stitch, and it has 2 needles, one either end of the thread, and it's crossing over all the time. Here's a demonstration, the white bit, the cardboard being the leather. You put one needle through, pull it through, and then you put the other needle through the same hole, pull it through. Then you tighten it up and go on to the next one. Now there is something vital to remember, because the thread is made up of lots of little threads. There's a mistake that you can easily make. You pull that one through and you push this needle through and without noticing it, you actually stab through the thread. Now, if you haven't noticed that, if it's happening in the leather and you pull this through, then you get in a real tangle. So every time you put that needle through, you have to pull this a little bit at the same time to make sure you haven't stabbed through, because it's a hell of a problem getting out of that if that happens. So that's the stitch, and you just keep on going. I think I've done 8,000 stitches in my life, or maybe a bit more than that. You keep going. This thread that I'm using is actually a tube of hundreds of different fibres there, so it's very easy for the needle to stab through it. Right, so sewing. I've actually started this one already. Put it in the clam with the jaws open, and I've over the years marked the width of the stitches there, and they sort of score marked, so I don't have to work out the distance between them each time, and that's tightened up, so it's held well in place there, maybe a little bit tighter. I've got used to, I can do with my eyes closed practically, the distance between the edge of the clam and the thread. But if you're not sure about it, just get a barrow mark and just mark with a barrow so that you know the right width to go. Piece of cork, just a wine cork, I put to the back there so that when I'm cutting with the diamond shaped awl, it doesn't push the leather out. This is the diamond shaped awl that's going in, making holes there. The thing with the sewing you have to remember is you'd like to have a nice big hole there so the needle could go through easily, but you want a smaller hole as possible because it has to be airtight and watertight. And so you've got to come to a compromise. So you can see with that needle it's still quite tight through there, and now obviously it has to pull two threads through because the end of the needle is doubled over. So you pull that through until you're back to one thread through there, and that's when you introduce the needle from the other side. And see how I'm pulling with my hand. I left enough of a loop there. See how I'm pulling with my hand. It actually helps it come through, but also you see it stabbed the needle the first time, it stabbed it. So I'm pulling a little bit more and it frees it out. And then you can pull. Now at this stage there are 3 threads going through that hole. So that's the widest it ever gets. And now there are only 2 because I've pulled it out. And then you pull, and my fingers after a bit of sewing, after a few bags, if I do them in succession, get quite calloused around there. It doesn't hurt at all, but you can put sticking plaster on, or some people have kind of glove arrangement, I think. But so, and this is what you do. And you do it, and you keep on doing it. And as I said, I think I've done 8,000 stitches or thereabouts. It's important to really pull. I mean, it's pre-stretch, but you don't want anything to slacken off. There's a hole that doesn't. See, I've stabbed through again that time, but I pulled it through. This final pulling is important. You're not just tightening that stitch up. As I pull, it's actually, I can see the thread going through back about 3. So this is a strong pull. Really quite tight, pulling it back. And that's the process. I'll do one more now. I really enjoy sewing bags, actually. You get into a rhythm. I get into a rhythm after a while. But it's useful to really notice what you're doing. Have your tools just where you need them. In fact, I usually leave my pliers in my hand all the time and work away. One of the inefficient things is if you've got the thread the needle too far out on the thread, you have to stretch for ages for it. So keep on moving the length of the thread out just a little bit here and there, so that it's about that width, but not, you don't have to reach further than that. And also that the advantage there is if the needle, where the thread goes through the eye of the needle, it gets the most wear there, so it's important to sort of move that every few threads. So you sew, and so you sew, and 35 minutes, half an hour, maybe 40 minutes later, you finish the bag. Here's your finished bag. And tie a knot in the thread, and because it's polyester, it melts easily, so I always singe the knot at the end. Just singe it a little bit and then put it out, so that kind of welds it together, so it's not going to come unknotted. A nifty trick that was taught to me by John Swain, which makes things look a lot neater, is just going round with the scissors, trimming the welt. It just makes the job look much tidier than having that sort of thing. So there you go. Now you know how to make a bag. I'll see whether it should hold air. It does, even without seasoning. Good bag. So there you are. Now you know how I make bags. The first one I made in 1983, and it must have taken me 2 days or so. It was a long process learning, but I picked up various wheezes here and there. I did have my friend for a while sewing some of them, but between us we've done about 1,000 bags. I've changed my system once in 2003 to using a needle. I started using something that's called a hog's bristle, which has kind of advantages. So 8,000 stitches possibly, half a mile of sewing, and it's my system. It works. I'm very proud of the bags. So I hope you learned something from this, and good luck to you.